What is up, guys? And thank you for watching and listening to our brand new podcast, The Uncommitted, a basketball recruiting podcast hosted by yours truly, EJ Stewart, along with Kendall. And as you guys see, we're doing this on YouTube, and this is our first venture into an actual video podcast. So, for those of us who listen to those of you guys who listen to us on our YouTube channel, our podcast network, New Generation Podcast Network. We're on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, TuneIn, and Stitcher. You can also now find this podcast in totality on YouTube. We're going to be doing it about a month. Every month, every top of the month, we'll be having a podcast. Anything crazy breaks, we may do a special one. This is not going to be like sports talk or hero talk where we're here every week, but we feel like there's a void when it comes to basketball recruiting podcasts, and Kendall being like just so on top of this stuff. I love high school basketball and college basketball. We thought that this made a lot of sense, so we came up with the name Uncommitted. I gotta give Kendall credit. We were talking about a lot of names here. Kendall, of course, being my co-host, I'll bring him in now. Kendall, talk a little bit about first of all, how excited you are about this new venture and this new name.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the venture, super excited. We're talking about something that obviously we followed our whole lives, pretty much, and we're both huge fans of college basketball. You being a Gonzaga fan, obviously.
Shout out! Had to represent episode 1.
Yeah, and normally Gonzaga, wouldn't be involved in basketball recruiting, but that things have changed.
Things have changed in recent years, man. We're gonna talk about it a little bit on the show.
But I'm a Memphis fan, so we're both obviously plugged in on basketball recruiting, and we've talked about this stuff off air, and the couple of videos that we've done on the high school basketball scene have been fairly well received. So we figured, why not turn it into a podcast? In terms of the name, I think it's funny because we had been going back and forth about potential names, and we throw this out there and that out there, but none of them really felt great. And
for various reasons.
We had teased this show for a while on Sports Talk, and every time we teased it, we were like, we still don't have a name for it. And so I figured, since it's a basketball recruiting podcast, how about Uncommitted? Since we are uncommitted to a name for the show. So I mean, as far as we know, it's going to go forward as Uncommitted. Maybe eventually we will commit to a name. Who knows? But right now we are uncommitted, and that is that's the future. This is episode 1.
Yeah, man, and that's the other thing too. I love the name. I think right now this could end up being the name of this podcast. But that's the other thing too, is that unlike other podcasts you see on our Apple Podcasts page or our SoundCloud page, you'll see that we usually date our podcast. This will be a podcast that's actually numbered by episode, which is a lot of podcasts do. Since we're not doing a show every week, I think it makes more sense to have this be a numbered podcast. I think that would be kind of a cool experience also to see how long and far this goes. So this is episode 1, our first venture into this, and let's kick off the show, and let's start off with really what's been dominating a lot of the chatter around high school basketball and college basketball, and it's been this new venture that the G League has started that is launching with some of the top prospects in the 2020 class. The basketball recruiting world was absolutely rocked last week when 3 of the top players had all been committed to foregoing their college freshman years to sign lucrative deals to play in the G League. So Jalen Green, Isaiah Todd, Daishen Nix will all be part of a G League pathway program that will get them professional coaching, training, and like 10 to 15 exhibition games with G League teams, other international teams, and even NBA academies. Green, who is seen by a lot of recruiting experts as the top player in the 2020 class, he signed a deal that's reportedly worth $500,000. Todd and Nix, both McDonald American players. Todd decommitted from Michigan. Nix reneged on a signed letter of intent to play at UCLA. So this is a massive deal. If you listen to Sports Talk, you heard us talk a lot about how the NCAA seemed to respond by allowing guys to now come in and make money off of their own name and through their own likenesses. They can sign endorsement deals and sponsorships now. So the G League certainly changed the game when it comes to recruiting. I'm curious, Kendall, just what do you make of what we can expect to see not just from these guys in this 1 year in the G League, but kind of moving forward about this venture?
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, again, I'm a Memphis Tigers fan, so this one hit really close to home in terms of the Jalen Green recruitment. We felt, I'll say we because I like him on the team, but Memphis felt really good about Jalen Green committing. They have felt for 2 years now that he was kind of the top priority when Penny first got the job. First was James Wiseman, second was Jalen Green, and it was a huge, huge blow to Penny Hardaway and what he was building, what he is building at Memphis, not getting Jalen Green to commit, especially considering Jalen Green said afterwards that had he gone to college, he planned on going to Memphis. So even though there's a lot of talk about Auburn, figures that was all smoke and that he was still going to end up going to Memphis, and that such a blow to the Memphis Tiger program. And not only Penny, but also Juwan Howard and Mick Cronin both with blows. I think of any of the programs that's most built to kind of sustain off this or to be fine after all of this, I would say UCLA can. Daishen Nix is obviously a terrific prospect, but he was sort of the icing on the cake. They're already going to be a Pac-12 favorite going into next season to bring most of their guys back. So, UCLA fans shouldn't be super worried. But I mean, Memphis and Michigan. I mean, obviously, Isaiah Todd and Jalen Green were going to be the premier players for their teams next season. Both teams losing potential NBA prospects. So, it's going to be interesting to see how those teams bounce back. And especially when we talk about the G League, I don't think it's a coincidence that the two of the three teams so far that have been affected have been coached by two former NBA players whose pitch, those being Penny Hardaway and Juwan Howard, have been, let me get you ready for the NBA. I know what the NBA is like. So a lot of those guys that you're going to get are going to be guys that say, well, I mean, why not just go to the G League? I mean, I'm literally going to be prepared for the NBA by the NBA. This is the NBA's venture. So it's going to be difficult for those guys going forward to convince the same type of five-star guy to go to their school as opposed to the NBA. Like, if you're going to Duke, you're not going to Duke necessarily to make the NBA. I'm sure it's part of it, but you're also going to Duke for the Duke experience and playing for the brand. Same with Kansas, same with even Kentucky. Maybe Kentucky also has some NBA to it, but Memphis and Michigan, those are particularly NBA pipelines as they would hope for. But the G League completely throw a monkey wrench in their recruitments, and now going forward, you're going to see teams, depending on what happens with the NCAA and their name, image, and likeness situation, you're going to see teams now have to try and alter recruiting strategies in terms of, all right, maybe we don't go after the top 5 or 6 guys because those guys are all maybe flagged for potential G League targets. Yeah. And as far as we've heard about the G League, it sounds like, at least for 2021, they're going to really stretch the guys they're going after. Like, they're not just going after the Jalen Greens. They're going after, the guys that may be high 4 stars. So it's going to be interesting to see how these coaches, react to the moves by Adam Silver and Sharif Abdul-Rahim and, Rod Strickland, of all people.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, that is going to be interesting about this because, as you said, a place like Memphis, that's not a place that's a blue blood type of school per se. They are recruiting really well right now, and they're one of the hot schools, so to speak. But they're not a Duke, Kansas, Michigan State, a team that just every year they're gonna have a certain amount of talent regardless of the situation. So you would think that those teams that would be hurt. What's interesting about the whole idea about them expanding to 4-star and 5-star players, or 4-star players rather, and maybe players not necessarily top of the line recruits, is that does really kind of raise a lot of question marks about kids and their decision making, because yes, that money that they'll get initially will probably be good. But I gotta be honest. I mean, if you're a 4-star recruit and your plan is to do 1 year in a G League program and then go to the NBA, I mean, are there some guys who could really stand out and end up surprising and becoming first round pick. Sure, I mean we see that in college basketball, guys who we didn't
Isaac
expect to
Okoro.
be. Yeah, we didn't expect to be one and done guys that show up in college and do that. But that's still very rare. I mean, you may have a lot of guys who end up going in this program, and I'm not sure. Maybe you know, Kendall, but is this supposed to be something where, like, if you don't have to enter the draft after year one, can you stay in the program for multiple years?
That hasn't really been
that hasn't really been explained, right?
That hasn't been explained. I think we assume that these guys are all going one and done,
Right.
and
Yeah,
they've talked about this being a one and done venture to oust the one and done. But not all these guys are one and done. Not all the 5-stars are one and done. To put it blank, like I don't know for a fact that Daishen Nix and Isaiah Todd were one and done. They may think they are, but a lot of guys think they are and then feel like they have to come back. But it is, I don't know anybody's personal situations, but I do think it's a little ironic that Sharif Abdul-Rahim is the president of the G League, and his son Jabari is signed, high 4-star, potential 5-star guy, signed to Virginia. He says he's not going to the G League. So if I were a a parent or even a prospect, I'd be like, why isn't your son playing in this thing?
right.
So if it was such a good venture.
I mean, if I was Penny Hardaway and Cal Parry, who I'll talk about their quotes in a second. I mean, I would when I go to recruit, that's exactly what I'd be telling them. I'd be like, this program is so questionable that Sharif won't even put his own son in it.
Yeah.
Now, what I will say, I want to make sure we get their quotes in because Penny was not happy at all, and that would make sense considering he was probably the guy who lost out the most in this group of players that were leaving. He basically compared it to tampering, and he initially called for the NCAA to, quote, take some desperate measures, which I think they did, if you ask me. He added, if it will affect how we recruit if the NCAA doesn't do something about it, if they don't keep taking steps forward to help these kids make money, they're going to take $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 in the G League program for 5 months to play on a select team and just do basketball instead of go to class. And then Cal Parry also went on his own Coffee with Cal show this week and said that the program will disillusion thousands and thousands of high school players about their basketball futures, which is kind of what we kind of just mentioned. Is okay, the Jalen Green, yeah, he can go one and done. I mean, Todd and
he'll be fine.
Yeah, Todd and Nix. I mean, okay, they're 5-star players. They're really good players. I think they would have been definitely impact players in their first year in college. But I don't know that they were guaranteed one and done type guys. I mean, you watch these guys even more than me. Am I wrong on that? Like, I think these were good players who could potentially have gone one and done, but they weren't complete sure things.
I mean,
Knicks probably.
If you're in that,
Todd probably
if you're in that
more so
range
than Knicks,
of, if you're in that range of 12 to 25 in high school basketball, and some classes are better than others, obviously, but if you're in that range from 12 to 25, you can jump up to the top 5, or you could be a guy that's undraftable. I mean, we saw last year, like we talked about, Isaac Okoro, guy who was, maybe 40, 50 in the top 100, jumps up into a top 5, top 10 pick at Auburn. And you look at someone like Matthew Hurt at Duke, top 15, top 10 guy, who is undraftable and has to come back for a second year. What happens if Matthew Hurt decides last year, I'm just going to go to the G League? Now he's stuck. And I think Matthew Hurt could have an NBA future once he gets stronger and develops, but he's not ready for the NBA next year. Some of these guys aren't ready for the NBA next year. And that's going to be the issue. Now, look, do I think Todd and Nix, I would have guessed they would have been one and done, but it's just not a slam dunk. My question to you, Jay, is why is the NBA doing this? Because I understand why the players are taking them. It's a pretty easy thing to explain, but why does the NBA see value in not only taking guys from Australia, taking guys from Europe that maybe thought about saying, all right, I can't go to college, I'm going to go to Europe. Now they're saying, we're going to take guys from the NCAA. Daishen Nix signed to go to the NCAA. Jalen Green planned to go to college. What's their end game? Is it just
I think the NBA. Yeah, I mean, to me, I have to go back to David Stern, his initial, comments about when they made the D League. Remember back then when it was the D League, and they want a Mike. they want a minor league system. I think that they've always wanted something similar to what baseball has. It was going to take a very long time, and the first, I'd say, I don't know how long G has been on, but it seems like 10 years. I mean, it's been really slow into making it anywhere close to what probably Major League Baseball has, where you have top young players playing in your minor league system. But I think at the end of the day, that's what NBA wants. So I think they look at the money that's been made on the NCAA in college basketball. They're like, why can't we profit on those dollars in any kind of way? Why are we just, yes, they're kind of developing our talent. A lot of times, as we said before, the NBA and NCAA have been kind of a partnership in a training ground for future NBA players. The NBA looks at it and says, why can't we, capitalize on that? And I think they knew that the moral police were going to be on their side. Because at the end of the day, me and you both agree, players should have been getting played a long time ago. And people will look at this and say, well, look, at least these kids are going out there and they're actually getting paid for their talent. And with this being a venue for them to do that, I think that's why we're seeing this. I think that the NBA saw a money-making opportunity, and they're trying to capitalize. Because they want the G League to be something that is
a brand,
a profitable brand, a marketable brand. Right now, it's not. And this could certainly help. I mean, if you're telling me you're getting the top players in high school and basketball, guys who would be playing at Duke and North Carolina, that's going to make me interested.
It sounds like they want multiple. Mark Steiner reported they want multiple G League select teams. Like, eventually, I think their vision is they have a G League East, a G League South, a G League West, and that would be the end of college basketball as we know it. I do think in terms of the G Leagues, just in terms of what is the value for them, because I feel like the NBA has to worry about, teams have to worry about, all right, now when we're scouting Jalen Green, especially Jalen Green is so great it may not matter, but someone like Isaiah Todd, Daishen Nix, their tape is just kind of irrelevant if they're playing a bunch of exhibitions, low competition exhibitions, versus guys that are playing in real games in the Big 12 like Cade Cunningham, or real games in the Pac-10 like Evan Mobley. Those guys, while it may even be worse competition, it's just you know what you're seeing. If a guy's dominating the Pac-12, you know he's going to translate to the NBA versus a guy who may be looking kind of shaky against the Sioux Falls Skyforce. I'm like, well, I don't know. I don't know what that means. So we saw it with R.J. Hampton. Really hurt his draft stock going to Australia. I think if he do it again, I certainly think he would consider just going to college. And, I mean, LaMelo Ball is going to be fine, but who knows what LaMelo Ball's draft stock would have been like, what his brand certainly would have been like had he played at USC. So we'll see. It's going to be an interesting venture, something I'm sure we'll be following, particularly probably every episode of this show, the way things are going, but certainly it'll be updated in the near future.
Let's get back now to some big commitments that we had this past month. Greg Brown just last week announced that he would not be joining this G League program. There was some discussion about whether or not he'd be one of the members. By the way, I do feel like these three guys, I feel like they're like the NWO, if you guys are wrestling fans. It's like, who's the third man? Who's the third man? If you're a wrestling fan, Hogan, Nash, and Hall, they became a group in WCW in the mid-90s. I feel like the guys in the G League, Green and Nix and Todd, they're the new NWO. We were trying to figure out who the guys were that were going in the G League. Now we know. We thought maybe that third man was going to be Greg Brown, but he actually did decide to commit to his hometown Texas Longhorns, his home state Texas Longhorns. And this is a huge get for Shaka Smart, whose job is definitely on the line. And another big recruit we had earlier this month, Josh Christopher, surprised a lot of people and decided not to go to Michigan. It's been a rough month for Juwan Howard, a really, really rough month. Two guys he thought he may have no longer has either of them. Christopher decided to go to Arizona State instead of Michigan. So Brown to Texas, Christopher to ASU. What's your thoughts on those, Kendall?
Yeah, I mean, well, Juwan Howard, welcome to college basketball.
Yeah, man. Hard knock life.
Yeah, the hard knock life. Michigan, I think, should be fine. They're a brand name. He's a big name coach, so I think they'll be fine in the long run. But for next season, that's certainly a blow. First on Greg Brown, I mean, you have to feel like the situation with the coronavirus certainly helped Texas in this recruitment, given obviously guys don't want to travel too far from home. Greg Brown being able to stay right home in Austin, and just the idea of Shaka Smart not being there, and the word was that Greg Brown said, "I'm not going to Texas if Shaka Smart is not the coach,"
Yeah.
and Texas, I don't. I think they fired. I think they fired Shaka Smart. To put it bluntly, if the situation wasn't so bad around the country, and I mean, of course, that's hypothetical. Wake Forest obviously made a change, which we'll talk about a little bit at the end, but um, you have to feel like that certainly changed things for his trajectory, which then made Greg Brown want to stay. And quite a get for Shaka Smart. I don't necessarily think it's a program changer. I think it's somebody that can maybe give him an extra year or two, uh, keep him
I
above
think he'll
water.
take it. At this
Yeah,
point.
exactly. I think he'll take it. He's got to stay alive until he can find the next job. Unfortunately, but I don't know if he makes him a national championship contender. But they're bringing pretty much everyone back from last year's team that it looks like it was going to end up sneaking into the tournament. And now you add Greg Brown, and I mean, look, they're going to be a top 25 team next year. So, credit to what Shaka Smart's built over there in Austin, but the Bobby Hurley rather commitment of Josh Christopher is huge.
Yeah.
Getting a kid to stay out on the West Coast, who's obviously a very West Coast kid. We talked about that in our recruiting predictions video. I mean, I was one of the few guys that went against the grain, picking Josh Christopher to Michigan. 100% of the 247 crystal balls had him going to Michigan,
Yeah.
and that's still for me like it never truly made as much sense that I think people wanted it to make sense. That someone from California would say, I'm not saying guys, I mean, Jalen Green's from California was going to go to Memphis, but Jalen Green stated openly that he had no problem leaving California. I don't know if I ever heard that from Josh Christopher, but
Mm-hmm.
Josh Christopher obviously going to play with his brother at Arizona State, which also almost always ends up being the case. The guys typically end up going to play with their family member, whether it's Cade Cunningham, whether it's what Dedrick Lawson did when he went to Memphis, and the
Yeah.
Lawson brothers, Evan Mobley and his dad being on the staff of USC. I think it'll end up being what Jonathan Kuminga does if he reclassifies and goes to Texas Tech to play with his brother.
Yeah, exactly. I think the Christopher stuff. I mean, I gotta give you a lot of credit because again, a lot of people were leaning Michigan. You were one of the few people who you thought Arizona State had a real shot, and that's a huge win for that program. And they could end up being a really good team next year. And as far as the Brown thing, I mean, Texas, as you said, they're bringing back almost everybody. It was a team that was not great. Obviously, they were sputtering and they were trying to find a way to get themselves into the tournament, but they got some talent. And one of the biggest issues with the team was they lacked, credible size. Size that can make a difference. And Matt Coleman, Andrew Jones, Courtney Ramsey, solid guards, but they needed some interior help. They already got Jericho Sims. Now you add Greg Brown. Okay, now you're working with something. And if you're Shaka Smart, sometimes the saying that you say, and I agree with, man. Once you're on the hot seat, you're never really off. So, are his days overall numbered? I'd say probably yes. But could this help him go a long way to possibly having a really good year next year and maybe kind of cooling off that hot seat a little bit? Absolutely, because I think Texas is in a position in a conference where I think that they're certainly going to be one of the teams to beat. That if they surprise people and they win the Big 12 or whatever, then who knows where things go. So it's definitely worth it. He had to have him. I think if Texas next year doesn't have Greg Brown, again, their expectations, teams bring back everybody, they should be good. But as we know, similar this year, expectations don't always work out that way. So they need a dynamic player. Greg Brown certainly is with his athleticism. So I think that he's got to feel good about having that guy on his roster. It's the only commit they have this year. He's the only guy
Yeah,
in the Texas recruiting class. So all the eggs were in the Greg Brown basket, and what's the name? Shaka Smart came up good with that recruit. Um, let's move to some other recruits now that are cutting down their lists. These are 2021 recruits. Let's start with Seattle forward Paolo Banchero. He is down now to Duke, Kentucky, Washington, Georgia, Arizona and Tennessee. Memphis big man Musa Cisse, he's now down to Florida State, Georgetown, Kentucky, Georgia, LSU, Memphis, and then another kid, Kenny Chandler from Tennessee, point guard. He's also cutting his list down. He's to Duke, Kentucky, Memphis, Tennessee, North Carolina. So the other guys are on 6 teams. Chandler has 5 schools. What do you make of the field that these 3 guys are deciding with? It's very curious to me, and you mentioned in the pre-show that Cisse and Chandler, there is some overlap.
Or Chandler and Banchero, rather.
Sorry, Chandler and Banchero, rather. There is some overlap some of the schools that are being discussed.
Yeah, really is overlap for all 3, I guess, if you think about it. But Banchero and Cisse, Banchero, I get them mixed up. Banchero and Chandler have been very, very vocal about the idea of them potentially packaging. And, if that happens, you look at the schools like Duke, Kentucky, and Tennessee as potential options. Rick Barnes really seemed to have made a push for Banchero and Chandler. And I think you may want to label them as the favorites for Kennedy Chandler at this stage. And, if that's the case, that really puts them in the mix for Paolo Banchero. Because if you think about it, why would a 5-star from Seattle want to play at Tennessee? It's not something that we've seen really in basketball. Maybe women's basketball, I'm sure it's happened. But in men's college basketball, I don't know if that's a rare sight. It's a rare sight in college football as well. But obviously, whenever a package deal is mentioned, that always stretches maybe a team's recruiting efforts. And so if Tennessee is able to land Kennedy Chandler, which will be tough, considering you have to deal with Duke also being in that mix and Kentucky will also be in that mix, though that'll be tough. And then with Banchero, Seattle kids always tend to do well. In terms of going to Washington, I should say Washington tends to do well with Seattle kids, and they, that's always been a threat. But I wouldn't sleep on Gonzaga as well, because if you're a Pacific Northwest kid, especially a big man, right now Gonzaga seems like the more attractive option than playing at Washington. And then obviously Kentucky and Duke are also in that mix as well. And both of them have the option of also, if you want to get both of Kennedy Chandler and Paolo Banchero. So that's how those recruitments stack up. And then with Musa Cisse, he's an interesting guy because he seems to be right now on the fence between reclassifying. And if he reclassifies, he could probably be the final piece for Memphis's program. They've put a lot of effort into him ever since he transferred from Christ the King out in New York to Lausanne and Memphis. And, he's, the guy's an elite shot blocker, probably the best shot blocker in high school basketball right now. Certainly could reclassify and be ready to play college basketball from day one. Obviously still has a lot of work to do on the offensive side of the ball, but having a rim protector like Musa Cisse for any program, they'll take him. But LSU and Florida State have certainly emerged as potential options. And Florida State, Hamilton has always done well over the last 5-6 years with 7-footers. So I think that's certainly attractive for Musa Cisse. So I would not sleep on Florida State, but Memphis has put a lot of effort into recruiting Musa Cisse. So, and losing Precious Achiuwa, they're going to need another big man. So, and Penny has stated they still want one more big man. I wonder who he's talking about. So that's the priority there. And he hasn't stated whether or not he's reclassifying, but typically when guys have the conversation about whether or not they're going to reclassify, they typically reclassify.
Yeah, whenever you start hearing the chatter about it, it eventually happens. So that's going to be interesting to watch with Cisse. If he reclassifies, I would agree. I think Memphis would absolutely be a massive favorite in that regard. But as you said, you know what? Shout out to Florida State. Leonard Hamilton, they always seem to be in the mix. And then every now and then they'll get a guy. You're like, oh, okay. I didn't think
Scotty Barnes this year. 5-star top 10 guy. Most people thought Oregon bound, maybe he'll go to Miami. Kid from Florida. He chose Florida State.
Yeah, and Leonard Hamilton is an excellent recruiter. He seems to make a really good impression on a lot of these kids, him and his program, because a lot of really top-notch players that you maybe wouldn't anticipate would consider the Noles end up considering them, and some of them end up signing. Jonathan Isaac being one of the bigger ones in recent memory. So I wouldn't sleep on the Noles here, especially if Cisse decides not to reclassify. In regards to Banchero, I like this kid's game. I watch him, and as a Gonzaga fan, I can't help but I see Rui Hachimura when I watch him play, and I'm sure that's what Mark Few sees. I'm sure for Banchero, that's one of the reasons why the Zags are on this board. It is interesting to see the two Washington schools, Gonzaga and Washington, along with the more national programs that you would expect to be going after a player like Banchero, Duke, Kentucky, Arizona, Tennessee. Tennessee thrown in there a little surprising, but to me, what's interesting about Tennessee and their run at not just Banchero but also Chandler is this. To me, is Rick Barnes really cashing in on the run he had last season.
Grant Williams,
yes, because
Admiral Schofield,
and we always talk about it with recruiting college basketball. To me, it's like a new coach can come in, they can make a great impact, and the key to sustaining that impact is, okay, can you cash in on that great visibility, that great season, to then put in great recruiting classes. And one other thing about that too is you want to put in great recruiting classes, but they still got to fit your program. One of the more, I think, insightful interviews I've ever seen on recruiting was with Jay Wright. And Jay Wright mentioned how when he first went to the Final Four with Villanova, it's kind of similar situation that Rick Barnes is in Tennessee. A program that was kind of dormant. He gets there, they go on a great run. They didn't go to the Final Four, obviously, but they were one game away pretty much, and they're one of the top teams in the country, ranked number 1 at some point. And Jay Wright talked about how after that season, he was getting, the Allen Rays, the Randy Foys, the Kyle Lowry. These guys were, good players, 4-star guys, but these weren't McDonald All-American, top 5, top 10 type recruits. And Jay Wright, after what he did at Villanova in his first time going to the Final Four, started getting those guys. So those guys started being interested in going into Villanova, but he said the problem was they didn't fit his scheme. They didn't fit the program and what they were trying to establish. So it didn't make sense to be getting these just top guys who kind of came in. Maybe they had a little bit of an ego.
To name names, you're talking about Dominique Cheek, right?
I don't want to just throw any particular player under the bus because it wasn't just Dominique Cheek.
He was a great player.
Yeah, but there were a lot of kids that had been like that. And you could argue the kid that just transferred from Villanova this year, maybe it's kind of a similar situation.
Yeah.
So with Tennessee, I'm fascinated, especially if they're able to land these guys, is, okay, this is Rick Barnes definitely cashing in on that moment of, you got the attention, recruits are interested, you got to cash in and get good players. And maybe doing that, but will these guys buy in to what Barnes is selling? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how good these kids are. If they don't buy in, it won't work.
As a Gonzaga fan, you've kind of dealt with that recently. I mean, Jalen Suggs is coming in next season as the biggest recruit in Gonzaga history. Yeah. And now you're on a list with Banchero. Gonzaga may be the favorite for Jalen Suggs' teammate, Chet Holmgren, who's the number 2 player in the country, depending on who you ask. Some people say it's Banchero. How does it feel? How do you react to now seeing Gonzaga on the list of guys that are certainly one-and-done prospects?
What's interesting is what we've seen from Gonzaga is we've seen guys that we thought they should be in play for, and as recruits, and maybe they even were in play for as recruits. No, don't go to Gonzaga. Go someplace else.
Kyle Wiltshire
and Nigel Williams-Goss. Go somewhere else. Come back and completely buy into the program. They're great assets to the team, and they go on Final Four or Elite 8 tournament runs. I feel like with Few and his recruitment of Banchero, I think he's very selective. That's the impression I get. It's hard to tell, but I feel like he goes after the guy that he knows can work. That's why he's not in on every top guy. Now he's going to be in more top guys. Obviously, he got Suggs this year, and this next season he's going to be in with Banchero and with
Chet.
Chet, exactly. I feel like he's targeting guys that he knows will buy into what he's selling, which I think is what makes Few a great coach. yes, this is, I think, few definitely does belong in the conversation of, yes, he's also cashing in on the recent success the Zags have had, because it hasn't been with guys who are top 5 guys, really. They've been with really good recruits, guys who were, McDonald Americans, Petrosev was a top 40, 50 recruit.
Drew Timme
was a McDonald American. So, they're getting really good players, but they're still not getting the one and done potential type guys. I think that if he's going to get a guy like that, it's going to be a guy he knows can work. But that's the key. I think with all these coaches is that if you're not, Duke, Kentucky, they don't care. The school, everybody wants to play for them, so they don't have that issue as much. I think when you're a Gonzaga, you're a Tennessee, you're a Villanova, I don't think you should just be going for, an all-star team. I think that for your team to kind of work with how you guys play, you're going to have to get guys that buy into a system. Because I think Kay and Calipari are kind of chameleons. I think they'll just, put guys in a position that they want to be in for the most part, or adjust what they have to do. I think that with a guy like Mark Few or Rick Barnes, they play a particular system, and you can't just upend everything you're doing for the sake of this one guy.
And I think when it comes to cashing in, also in recruiting, and obviously the term cashing in is a little tongue-in-cheek probably.
Yeah, but we know what we mean, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But obviously, when in terms of obviously having recruiting success after on the court success, we also have to talk about a lot of these coaches have put guys in the NBA. Few now has put a plethora of bigs and point guards in the NBA. So now a Jalen Suggs can look at and say, oh, wow, now Nigel Williams-Goss is in the NBA. He's got Jeremy Pargo. He's put guards in the NBA. Paolo Banchero can look at.
And those guys look at those guys and say, wait, that guy was nowhere near as good as me in high school. And that guy got to the NBA, or that guy became an All-American, first team type guy, or that guy won the Conference Player of the Year. Well, what if he got me and my talent? These kids are starting to see that now. I've been saying that for years as a Gonzaga fan.
Yeah.
That they should look at them.
And the same thing goes for Tennessee with Grant Williams. Same thing goes for Texas Tech with Jarrett Culver. Now them being in the mix with Kuminga and them getting Amari Burnett. Those types of programs feel like, all right, let's get one or two guys in the NBA and we'll really see things thrive. Last thing I want to mention on Moussa Cisse is that don't sleep on the fact that Memphis had Precious Achiuwa and Lester Quinones last season, and those guys both having a lot of success in their freshman season. Those guys are both from New York, and Moussa Cisse is from New York, and obviously transferred to Memphis, which obviously all the jokes about Penny moving him to Memphis, like he moves Wiseman, certainly out there, but he's a New Yorker who's obviously close with Precious Achiuwa and Lester Quinones. Don't sleep on not playing a factor. Precious Achiuwa came in as one of those fringe 5-star guys that we talked about, like a Daishen Nix or an Isaiah Todd that could have been one and done or could have had a rough freshman season. He absolutely had an excellent freshman season, AAC Player of the Year, American Conference Player of the Year, and now is a projected lottery pick. It's going to be tough for Moussa Cisse to see that and not feel like you can't tell me those guys aren't in his ear saying we could do the same thing with you. Or Penny can do the same thing for you that he did for me if you're Precious Achiuwa. It kind of goes back to I was watching the documentary on the EYBL that Uninterrupted did on Fox Sports that EJ actually, he tipped me off to, said it was good. And the director of the Oakland Soldiers AAU program was talking about how they had Boogie Ellis, who's right now at Memphis. He talked about, Boogie Ellis being from San Diego. He was like, if Boogie Ellis doesn't have a good experience here, I'm never going to get another player out of San Diego. Because they're a team in Northern California, and I feel like that's what happened. That could happen with Penny Hardaway and Moussa Cisse. Is Precious Achiuwa having such a good experience at Memphis could help him get other guys from New York. So that should be certainly something interesting to watch.
All right, last story of this podcast. After announcing the firing of Danny Manning last week, Wake Forest has moved ahead and hired former East Tennessee State coach Steve Forbes to lead his program. Forbes led the Buccaneers to 2 conference tournament championships in his 5 years at East Tennessee State. In every season, the Buccaneers won at least 24 games. This past season, they notched 34 wins and were considered to be, by many, a very dangerous threat in this tournament had it happened. What's interesting about Forbes now also is he has a very long history as a top assistant. He was assistant under Bruce Pearl at Tennessee. He was assistant under Billy Gillispie at Texas A&M, and he was an assistant under Greg Marshall at Wichita State. He also coached one of the top JUCO programs in JUCO college basketball as well recently before going to East Tennessee State. So we've seen Wake Forest, Kendall, really, unfortunately, since the passing of Skip Prosser, really kind of be in a malaise. What feels like for it's been more than a decade now, where we haven't really seen them make the kind of impact you would expect after having Tim Duncan and Chris Paul. They were a premier ACC program. They've kind of been again dormant. What do you make of this hiring of Forbes, and do you think he makes an immediate impact on the recruiting trail? Because they haven't really been getting those type of guys.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, there are probably guys that I'm missing, but I feel like the last super 5-star guy that they got was Al-Farouq Aminu.
That's what I'm thinking, yeah.
And that was a long time ago. That was Skip Prosser, I think, recruited him.
Yeah, and then Dino Gaudio signed him, yeah.
Yeah, Dino Gaudio coached him, yeah, but, that was a long time ago. And Wake Forest was a brand name in college basketball.
Yes.
Certainly, obviously, you said with Tim Duncan and then eventually Chris Paul, that era, they had, it really was a 4-team rivalry in North Carolina. It really doesn't feel like that anymore. It feels like NC State is kind of the third wheel, and Wake Forest is you forget they're probably even in the state because they don't get guys.
Yeah.
So it's tough because North Carolina is always a good situation to recruit in because Duke and North Carolina, especially recently, are national programs. They don't really, if they're a super 5-star guy in North Carolina, they'll get that guy. But there's plenty of opportunity for you to scrounge up the guys that are 4-stars that maybe Duke and North Carolina are overlooking. And they haven't seen to be able to really be successful with those guys. So, look, I think Steve Forbes is a adept identifier of talent and guys that maybe are a little under the radar. And like you said, he's an excellent recruiter, and he's able to get guys at Wichita State that fit the Wichita State brand. Obviously, what he did at Tennessee was great. You mentioned the JUCO connections, and at East Tennessee State really showed not only is he an excellent recruiter, but he has some real coaching chops as well.
Yeah.
And we talked about it before. We talked about it on our podcast when the NCAA tournament was canceled, how we kind of felt bad for some of the coaches that weren't able to kind of build a brand for themselves off of a tournament run.
Right.
Anthony Grants of the world, the Brian Dutchers of the world at San Diego State.
Yeah.
But, Steve Forbes rather still was able to, build off of the success that he had at East Tennessee State to get a job like Wake Forest. You do feel happy for him. And look, I think Danny Manning era wasn't going anywhere. So I understand why they wanted to make a move, and I think they could be headed in the right direction. I wouldn't say that all of a sudden they're going to be some ACC power, but Steve Forbes feels like one of those coaches that will find a way to get players to Wake Forest and will find a way to win games.
Yeah, I think that you texted me the hiring. I thought this was a really strong hiring. It came at a weird time because they fired Manning at a weird time. I think they fired him because they knew that they could get Forbes, because that's the only reason why you fired a guy this late in the game. I think this could end up being a really under the radar, game changing move potentially. Potentially, because you never know how things work out. But Forbes knows the South very well, and that's a place where you're gonna have to recruit to win at Wake Forest. It's crazy. There was a point when under Skip Prosser, the Wake Forest Demon Deacons went to the tournament 12 out of 15 years. Since then,
that's unbelievable. Think about now.
Since 2006, they have only made the tournament 3 times. It's night and day. You just think about what Wake Forest was and what they are now. It's kind of wild. But I'm excited to see what Ford could potentially do. Sorry, go ahead.
No, but it goes back to putting guys in the NBA, man. That helps recruiting. And look, they have Jeff Teague, they have Ish Smith, and Chris Paul, 3 point guards in the NBA. So you would think point guards would be more interested in playing in the NBA. But Danny Manning, and he played in the NBA. So I don't know where the recruiting thing just didn't work out. You would think.
Well, the one thing about Wake Forest is it's the academic requirements are very high, which was part of the recruiting appeal to Wake Forest. Was, hey, okay, you don't want to go to like Harvard, but you go to you can go to Wake Forest. It's kind of like the Vanderbilt of North Carolina, where like it's a very it's a small school, but it's very hard to get into. It's the academic standards are really high, but if you're a guy who's staying 4 years trying to graduate a degree from Wake Forest, means a lot. So I think that it had its own recruiting niche that worked, and for whatever reason,
trying to get the one
Jeff Bizdelic, and Guardiola, none of them have really been able to quite figure that out. Because you don't have to get a bunch of one and done guys to compete in the ACC. Tony Bennett's been winning the ACC without those guys. So it didn't make sense why Wake Forest had become just so terrible. Similar to kind of Boston College, again, another program. It's kind of crazy, but I think Steve Forbes can end up being a really strong hire. Like you said, he really showed he can coach East Tennessee State, because I like the idea of sometimes we talk about the assistant going to a big program and how it doesn't work because you realize a guy maybe in game management isn't as good, or maybe the lack of ability to recruit with the name brand behind you is as good. Forbes having that long tenure as an assistant coach, then coaching in JUCO, where he was a highly successful coach at JUCO. He got a lot of guys to D1. Then he went to East Tennessee State, a very, very good mid-major program, to be fair. It wasn't like he went to a place that, has never been good.
Never been to the tournament, yeah.
Right. He went to a very good program, but he sustained that success, and they played exceptionally well this past season. And it was a sustained success. It took multiple recruiting classes for that team to continue to play well. And he seems to have all the check marks I want to hear from a guy who maybe is coming from a smaller school, who's never coached at a big school, who's been a long-time assistant. I mean, I don't want to jump out the window and say, Wake Forest is back. The cupboard is bare. It's going to take some time. But I think firing Manning was the right move, and I think there's a chance that this Forbes thing could work out.
I want to throw in one more thing that I want to mention real quick before we close out.
Yeah.
Obviously, you watch if you watch Sports Talk, we have that Kendall's court at the end. I want to throw a quick Kendall's court for the Gatorade Player of the Year was announced, which is essentially the best player in high school basketball. And the three finalists were Cade Cunningham out of Montverde, Evan Mobley out of California, Rancho Christian, and Imani Bates out of Michigan, I believe Lincoln High School. And they gave it to Imani Bates, who's only a sophomore. And credit to Imani Bates, who, will almost undoubtedly be the number one pick whenever he's eligible for the NBA draft. But I think that was a slightly disrespectful move to Cade Cunningham and Evan Mobley, particularly Cade Cunningham, who played on one of the, if not the best high school basketball team we've seen in a long time.
Yeah.
And team defeated, and he was certainly the best player in high school basketball last year. I don't know how he didn't win that award. I understand the Imani Bates hype is real. I understand he's going to be a superstar. And look, I'm not going to go on a rant, but I could look crazy, 10 years from now saying that Imani Bates shouldn't have won this award as a sophomore.
Yeah.
But, I could be playing the sound bites. They could be playing this video in an Imani Bates documentary in 10 years. But I just think that giving this award to a sophomore who hasn't even competed at the highest level of high school basketball is egregious. As great as he is, Cade Cunningham, we didn't get a Geico National Championships and things of that nature, but Cade Cunningham played a national schedule, played against all the best teams in the country, and won consistently, blew teams out consistently. And we're going to give it to Imani Bates, who the team didn't really even play a national schedule? To me, that's very premature. Again, great player, but it feels like Gatorade was, and whatever selection committee they had, was feeding into the hype rather than looking at the facts of Cade Cunningham being the number one player in the country, who's a senior in high school, who has one of the most mature games we've seen for a high school prospect in a long time.
Yeah,
it's hard for me to justify. If you told me Cade Cunningham, like Evan Mobley is largely a potential prospect, So I understand maybe you picking Bates over Mobley, but Cunningham is a better player than Bates is right now. That goes without saying. So I don't know. That's my soapbox at the end. I think that Gatorade, I don't know if they have something where they want to sign Bates in like 5 years, so they're gonna give it to him now. But if I'm Kate Cunningham, I'm drinking Powerade going forward.
Yeah, the Bates thing definitely seemed premature. But I think it's one of those things where, people like to get ahead of the curve, and they want to be able to say that we were one of the first to recognize this person's greatness. It kind of reminds me of, Sports Illustrated's cover of, the best high school player since LeBron James is Jabari Parker. Jabari Parker's, great high school player. Did he deserve the LeBron James type hype? That seemed very questionable.
Looking back on it,
look back on it, it looks kind of crazy now. If you talk about I'm not sure if it's Time or one of these political magazines saying, the savior of the Republican Party is Marco Rubio. Like, again, this is a political show, but that seemed like, wow, that's a really big leap with like not a lot of real evidence to suggest it. But a lot of these times, these outlets do want to get ahead of the curve. So to me, this is what Gatorade is doing with Bates. They want to be able to say, hey, we gave this high school phenom this award way earlier than anyone else would have awarded him this because we knew his greatness. And you hope that in 10 years, he's the best player in the NBA, he's a phenom, he's the next LeBron James, and then they can have that. That's why that happens
and
to me.
It's what's crazy about it is that, like, why not just do the smart thing? Because nobody looks back at LeBron, because LeBron won it as a junior, which was great, and he won it as a senior, like he should have.
Yeah.
But nobody looks back and says, all right, LeBron, he came out in 03, so I guess his sophomore year, the best guys in high school basketball were Kwame Brown and Tyson Chandler. Nobody looks, and Eddie Curry. Nobody looks back and says, oh, why did Tyson Chandler win Player of the Year in high school over LeBron? That's so crazy. Kwame Brown was such a bump. Those guys were good in high school.
Right, yeah.
They were the reason they were drafted in the top 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Like, LeBron was a sophomore. No, it wasn't crazy to have those guys as the Player of the Year in high school as seniors when LeBron was a sophomore. If Kate Cunningham won Player of the Year, he would have lived up to the hype. I mean, I'm not saying he's going to be a great player, but no one's going to look back and say, oh man, that Kate Cunningham over Imani Bates.
Yeah, Kate Cunningham is clearly a great high school player and the best player potentially. Especially in terms of like winning and what his
right. Talking about like
stats.
Right now.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. Again, there's certainly some marketing involved in that, and I don't know. I don't want to say I lose respect for the Gatorade Player of the Year, but it's kind of like you realize a lot of this is all it's all a show.
Yeah. Well, make sure our viewers and listeners remember this in 15 years when this segment is on the Next Dance, the story of Imani Bates.
Yes.
His run with the New York Knicks.
Yeah, I can't wait.
To 6 NBA championships.
Yeah, I'm going to be the guy that was blasting Imani Bates in high school saying he's overrated.
Imani Bates, like, this idiot on this podcast was talking about how I didn't deserve to win Gatorade of the Year. And that's really what propelled me to be the best player in the NBA.
Yeah, if I'm Powerade, I'm coming out and saying, our Powerade Player of the Year is Kate Cunningham.
Yeah, they don't even have an award. I just come out and be like,
just make up an award.
We just decided during these dark times we want to honor our high school athletes, and Kate Cunningham, you're the star. You're the player of the year. I don't know. I would do the same thing. All right, but I think that's gonna wrap up our first ever episode of the Uncommitted podcast, a basketball recruiting podcast. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. Again, this can be found on our YouTube channel, New Generation Media. This is episode 1. You can also find it on our podcast network, New Generation Podcast Network. That's the audio version, clearly. You can find that on SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, and TuneIn. That's it for us, though. Thank you guys for watching, and thank you guys for listening in. For Kendall, I'm EJ. Take it easy, guys. Peace.